At the Max Planck Institute, we do basic research and applied research. The applied research concerning heuristics and also risk communication focuses on health. So I have trained about 1,000 doctors in their continuing medical education. The law, I've trained about 50 US federal judges and businesses. I'm giving many talks to CEOs, to managers and other things. What are they interested? In business, one problem is that much of what's being taught at the universities is not of much help, particularly when it's all about small worlds. For instance, many decisions in businesses are under high uncertainty. Nobody can calculate the probabilities and do the calculation. You know a few facts. And typically, an expert then is sitting on a mountain of information. Part of it where you wonder why you got it, whether it's reliable. And then you have to make a decision. And often this is then a gut feeling about what options to take. I have worked with large companies, worldwide companies, and interviewed the CEOs and the top decision makers. And when you ask them, in what proportion of the cases is the final decision an important professional decision, a gut decision? Then depending on the company, the answer is roughly in about 50% of all decisions. Now, the same decision makers would not say this necessarily in public, because intuition is today not something that is highly respected in business. In art, yes. There you don't want people who do calculations and then make compositions out of calculations. Here intuition counts, but not in other places. So I've done research on what's the essence or the process of intuition. And often it appears to be a very simple heuristic, where the art is again to focus on the most important part and ignore the rest. And there's also research that has then taken these results into the laboratory and then asked the question of the normative question, now is that heuristic really as good? And where you can analyze business decisions, and there are not too many of these studies, but there is a growing number. And that shows that in many situations, relying on one reason leads to better business decision than doing some complex calculation. All this has also another side, and it's the problem that our society has with intuition. The many politicians, doctors, or business people, with the exception of family businesses, which have little problem with going with their guts, but those who have to report to others, have to be accountable, hide their intuitions, and which leads to unnecessary costs and time and waste of intelligence in a company. So for instance, there's a CEO who feels that's the way we should go, but he knows if something goes wrong, and I be asked, why did you choose option A? I said, I had this gut feeling. That's not something that counts. So what you do is, you send an employee for several weeks to bring the data after the fact, or the reasons for the decision, or more expensive, you hire a consulting firm that writes on 200 pages why your decision is the best one, including a PowerPoint. So that's just an illustration about the problems that our society has and their unnecessary costs. The alternative would be to realize that we need both. You need facts and also the intuition of an experienced expert. And the only question is, when should we rely on what, rather than pretending that it's all algorithms and all facts. And also, we live in a society where people trust algorithms, calculations, much more than intuitions. And the question is typically, but intuitions can be wrong. The question is really, but algorithms can be wrong. And if you look at the last financial crisis, these algorithms that did the AAA ratings were obviously wrong. And most of the algorithms that are used in that area don't predict very well. But they are in part used because as a self-protection for the decision maker. A similar problem is in medicine, where a doctor often has a good intuition based on lots of experience. What's wrong with you? But he or she also knows that even the best intuitions work in 80% or 90% of the cases, and then there are some cases where you are wrong. And then you might be sued if you honestly say, I had an intuition, I followed it. So what do the doctors do? They order tests in order to protect themselves, not necessarily to know more about the client, and also do unnecessary diagnostic and treatments. That's called overtreatment, overdiagnosis, which they would never do with their own members of their own family or themselves, because you don't have to protect yourself against them, typically. So this is a large phenomenon where good intuitions are either discarded, hidden for self-defensive reasons, which leads in our society to unnecessary costs, unnecessary loss of time in business, in politics, and also in part harm to the patient in case of medicine because of overtreatment. In a recent study where American physicians in high litigation practices, like gynecologists, surgeons, have been asked, are you practicing defensive medicine? 93% answered yes. And they said, mostly I do unnecessary MRIs, computed tomography, CTs, biopsies, screening tests, cancer screening tests, and other things, in order to protect myself. And in the US, the legal situation is very difficult for any doctor to do evidence-based medicine. That's what patients often do not realize. I've just published together with Sir Muir Gray, who is reshaping the British healthcare system, a book called Better Doctors, Better Patients, Better Decisions. And the British Medical Journal has launched this book. And it's about setting up a new environment that allows medical evidence to get to doctors and to get to patients, and also creates an environment in which good intuitions can flourish rather than be hidden, and in where patients can get better treatments for less money.